Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. I'm going to be waiting for a few more people to arrive, but when you do, please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you're from, what your role is. My name is Ashley Stegeman. I'm in the Cincinnati area, and I serve on the Stadia team. So welcome. Please come on in. Please introduce yourself by using the chat feature. Would love to know again what your name is, where you're from, what your role is. Please introduce yourself on the chat. We'd love to say hi before we dive in. Looks like we've got a few more people coming in. Again, for those of you who just got here, my name is Ashley Stegeman, serve on the Stadia team. Please introduce yourself. There's a chat button feature that we can use for you to introduce yourself. So your name, where you're from, what your role is. We'd love to say hi and meet you. And there's also an area where it says Q&A where you guys can ask questions throughout the webinar. All right, well, we're going to get ready to get started. Again, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section, as well as let us know where you're from and who you are. We'd love to say hi. We're really excited to start this webinar today. So I'm going to bring in my friend Sam Chaco. Sam, if you could go ahead and come on in, I want to get us started. And so Sam is here to kind of help lead us on this webinar today. And one of the questions that we hear all the time at Stadia is, how do I develop leaders? And then what do I do with them after I have them? And so Sam is going to be leading us through this webinar. But before I officially hand it off, I want to take a moment to just introduce Sam and tell you guys a little bit about who he is. So Sam serves as the lead pastor at Loft City Church in Richardson, Texas. He also serves on the Stadia team as a startup coach. He helped plant the church in 2011 and has seen the church become a multi-ethnic, multicultural church community. Sam's a second generation Indian American and a third generation pastor. He's also been a bivocational church planter and has over 15 years of experience in marketplace ministry. I know church planting is something super near and dear to Sam and his family. And so we're really excited, Sam, for you to kick this off. I'm going to hand it over to you, but I'll hop back on later for questions. Those of you that are in the audience, please, as we're moving through this, submit any questions you have. We're going to have time at the end. Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Thanks, Ashley. Hey, friends, excited to be here with you guys today. Thank you for joining us. Again, as Ashley said, feel free to drop your name and where you're from in the chat. And if you would, I'd love to know why you're here. Like, what drew you to this webinar today? So if you're interested and open to that, drop your name, where you're from, and what drew you to this webinar today so we could know who's in the room. I'm super excited to introduce two new friends, Chandler Miner and Matt Love. I'm going to invite them to come on board, and I'm going to invite them to share um, who they are and introduce themselves as well. So apparently we're having technical issues with the chat. So go ahead and use the Q&A button and put who you are, where you're from, and what drew you in today. And I apologize if you have to do that again for the second time. But I'm super excited that Matt and Chandler are here today. I got to meet them last week and just hear what God is doing in their churches. And so I want to let them talk and share who they are and where they serve and then why residency is a passion for them. So you guys go ahead and pick whoever wants to go first. So actually, if you want to hold off on the residency part, we'll dive into that on the second part. So yeah.
Chandler, you can get us kicked off if you want to.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Chandler Miner. I am coming from Austin, Texas. So I work for a church called The Well. So we're right in East Austin, which is a low-income neighborhood. We meet at a high school every week. And we are a church that our vision is actually to plant 100 churches internationally and 100 churches nationally in our first 50 years. So church planting is a really big part of what we do, as well as just developing leaders. I feel like that's something that our church is called to. So I'm the operations director, kind of do all the behind the scenes things, but a big part of my role is helping with our church planting and residency efforts.
It's amazing.
Yeah, guys, my name is Matt Love. I am at the Summit Church in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. And actually, so I'm the director of church planting for North American Church Planting for the Summit Church. I'm also the director of cohorts and development for Summit Collaborative, which is the church planting network that is kind of sprung out of Summit's domestic church planting efforts. So I've been doing this for the past 8 years. The biggest elements of my role, I coach new church planters as they're preparing to launch. And then I'm also helping the 70 churches that are part of the Summit Collaborative work to develop leaders that can ultimately, the phrase we use in the collaborative is we want our churches to thrive and multiply. So, if something's going to multiply, it has to be healthy. And we think if leaders are thriving at every level of our churches, we're going to identify planters, but we're also just going to have really strong, healthy churches that are capable of planting. So love leader development, love church planting. I'm excited to have this call. Though it's super weird, webinar style, I can't see anybody that's on the call. I feel like I'm having a Zoom call with 2 people, but I'm excited to get to share a little bit of what God's taught us over the years. So
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm going to break this time up into like 3 segments so that we can kind of have a pathway to go through. Segment 1, I'm going to spend some time wanting to talk about vision and approach to church planting residency. And then we'll kind of drive into like practical stuff, practical structures, how you find residents, what does your residency contain? And then segment 3, we'll talk about challenges that you guys have faced and then solutions that maybe are helpful. And then I'm going to invite Ashley back on and ask questions of all 3 of us at that point. So let's begin with vision and approach. Why residency? Why did you guys, when did you start your residency? Why residency was important? What's your vision for your residency? And so, yeah, share.
Sweet. Yeah, residency is really important at the Well. It's something we've really been doing from the beginning. So our church was planted 12 years ago from a church planting residency in the city. And so our pastor experienced a really good residency that set him up for success to be able to plant our church. And so we have already had 3 national church planters go through our church planting residency, which can be anywhere from 1 to 3 years. We actually currently have 2 church planters, and we're actually interviewing 3 more. So
Nice.
We're really moving quick. The Lord has really blessed that. We were super prayerful last year, not sure who our next church planter was going to be. And then the Lord was like, here's a bunch, a lot of people that are really called and gifted. So we just believe in the power of residency. It's one of the highest forms of discipleship for us to welcome somebody onto our team. So we do a ministry residency and we do a church planting residency. And so ministry residency is, diving into kids ministry or student ministry and developing in that way. And then church planting is giving you a lot of skills to be able to plant a church. But what we do is welcome those people onto our staff team. And so they are a part of us. And one of our phrases is that we celebrate going and not growing. And so we don't want to be a church that's growing. We want to be a church that's sending. And so that's just been a passion for us, is to develop people. And so we just believe that we're called to multiplication, that we're called to church planting. So within that, residency is the most natural way to do it. And I think one of the highest forms of sending out people really well to where they will be successful for the long term because they have a support system and not just being sent out and then now what do I do? So we see residency as a long-term way to really support and equip people for the work of ministry for the rest of their lives.
That's awesome.
Good.
Going, not growing. I really like that. So that's really cool. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, so this started for us about 15 years ago at the Summit Church. And when we are the first planter that we kind of sent using the residency, and this is good news for anybody that's just getting started in this process, is that residency was basically that planter and somebody else sitting in a room reading books and talking about stuff, and then calling church planters and asking them what they should do. So, you know, it really was very, very basic. Over the last 15 years, obviously, the church planting residency's grown, and we've formalized a lot and added to it and made it better. Summit also has a ministry residency similar to what Chandler described. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think residency is about two things. One, the power of it is about two things. One is there's a story from when we first started in the church planting journey at Summit that always sticks out to me. And it was basically, we started talking to church planters, and we said, why do you feel like church planters fail? Like, what's the issue? What's kind of one of the biggest things that's like leading to a church planter failing? One of the planters we talked to, he kind of stopped us and he said, well, first of all, I think one of the biggest problems is when a church plant fails, the person we point the finger at is the church planter and not the church that sent them. And that was just very striking to me, because I think that's a great, like, there's just a shift there. If a plant fails, there's this tendency to be like, well, what did the planter do wrong? Well, maybe the church that sent them didn't equip them, didn't prepare them, didn't give them the time and resources and input and community and all these things they needed. And so that was really a guiding principle for us. We want to take a high level of ownership, very similar to what Chandler was describing. We want to take a high level of ownership of the success or failure of the people we send out. We want them to feel like we are 100% behind them in their corner. So that's one thing. The second thing is a lot more practical and a lot more straightforward than that, which is experience is the bedrock of growth and development, right? So people are very rarely transformed by books. They are often transformed by experiences. Content is always helpful as a setup to a developmental experience. So when we think about building a residency, the difference between a residency and church planting training is residency happens in the context of experience, ministry experience. You're in a church, you are sitting, you know, for church planters, you're sitting in elder meetings, you're preaching, you're leading a team, you're watching somebody, you know, set something up, you're talking to all these different teams. Ministry residency, you're in the life of the church working and operating. So I think that mix of ownership from the sending church standpoint, and then just the reality of how much development happens in the context of experience, is why that residency idea has been so powerful for us as we've tried to plant more churches.
That's awesome. Good. How are you at Chandler? You talked about 3 this year. How are you finding residents? Are they coming from outside? Are you finding folks inside? Where are these residents coming from? Yeah, Chandler, if you want to begin, but then Matt, I'd love to hear from you as well on that. So,
Yeah, for sure. I would say we're both inside and outside when it comes to finding church planters. So specifically church planting, we have had most of our church planters come from the outside, but recently have had a couple of people from the inside. But then our ministry residency is all members of our church. So all 5 of our current residents we're developing from inside of our church. And so that's been really sweet. I don't know if y'all know much about the demographics of Austin, but we're super, super young. So the average age of our church, I believe, is 26, maybe 27. We're super young. And so when it comes to
what's your per person per year giving number? Is it like the lowest number you've ever seen in your entire life?
It's pretty low, but we have some people that are really passionate about what we do. So
that's good.
Yeah, we're in a great spot. But yes, it does lead to its challenges, I think, especially when looking for the qualifications of a church planter, that they can be an elder, that they can plant a church, that they have entrepreneur skills. All of those things are at play with church planting. And so we've mostly found those people on the outside. But like I said, recently we've had a few on the inside. And we believe that our ministry residency will lend itself to that as well. There's one of our 5 who's already like, oh, I think I could do church planting. And then our hope really for the other 4 is like, in a dream world, in 2 years, you leave our ministry residency and you go to a church plant. So if you're kids, you're going to go with one of our plants to be their kids director. So that's best case scenario. One of the other practices that we have is every time we're hiring any position, it's like, have you thought about planting a church? We ask that before we even really talk about the position that we're interviewing for. So associate pastor, college director, missions director, that's really something that we're like sensing as like, hey, is there calling here? Like, have you thought about church planting? Let's just give you that idea, as well as that's something that we keep in front of our people often. We're celebrating our church plants. We are talking about church planting. We're reminding them of the vision every few weeks to our entire congregation. Like, we want to plant 100 churches nationally and internationally. That's a big call, which means we have to plant at a high rate. And so even in the last 3 weeks, we've had multiple people come up after a sermon where we mentioned, hey, we have 2 people. We're praying about 2 more. We just got a 3rd. And so it's like, that's really exciting just to see people who are moving into the city who maybe have been a pastor before or maybe haven't, but are like, I'm really interested in this. We also have other pipelines. We have a preaching and teaching class, which is a way that we kind of see some of the skills of like, oh, you might actually have the skill to do this. We also do, mission of God. We do a lot of like vocational types of teaching that's like, oh, if you're really called to entrepreneur, but you also are a shepherd, maybe this is something you could do. So it's really just something we talk about really consistently, but definitely inside and outside. We've tried all the traditional techniques, going to conferences, doing seminary, those things not as successful for us as really just like continuing to put the vision out there and to pray. We've prayed a lot. We spent a year, our elders, our team, just praying, and we're really seeing the harvest of that.
That's amazing. That's cool.
Yeah, Chandler, I mean, we're very similar. I mean, maybe I'll say it this way. We definitely have both. But I will say very strongly, we do not work on finding external people. We only work on, I do not spend time finding external people. I will talk to external people to get connected. But the reality is, Chandler said this, you can go recruit out in the world. You can go to conferences and try to do stuff. We found all the church planners that had already been developed, and we're just waiting for someone to give them an opportunity. We found all of them. So at this point, if we want to plant more churches, the next phase of church planting belongs to the churches that develop leaders. Like I think that is just the bottom line. So for us, over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say for the first 10 years, we were primarily external. It was very relational, but it was primarily external. And we just saw it's like, this is getting harder and harder and harder to get fewer and fewer people. And we just really were like, about 4 years ago, we got to do something different. We got to really shift the posture here. And we just really started leaning into at the summit, but also at all the collaborative churches that already existed. We would say our lead measure for the lag measure of church planting is develop leaders. We have a couple of ways that we do that, but we are really, really leaning into developing leaders at every level. It's why, again, I agree with Chandler, ministry residency is so powerful because it starts the process of A, having a development culture, B, just getting people engaged in the mission, casting vision, all that kind of stuff. But we have, again, over the last 4 years, really leaned into with Summit and our churches, trying to sift for leaders and starting them on the process of development. And I'll just, this is a brag on what the Lord has done in that. Not on anything we've done, because we feel like in a lot of ways we talk about all the time on our team, we feel like we're riding a wave. But over the last 4 years, we've identified over 100 planters in the 70 future planters in the 70 churches that are part of Collaborative. We have 15 church planters that are going through residency at one of our collaborative churches and that are doing a training cohort with the Collaborative. And we have 12 planters identified for next year. Not all of them, they might not all make it into it, but it's because we've been for 4 or 5 years now doing the leader development thing. And that's where I think for a lot of churches, my just encouragement, no matter where you are in the process, one of the hardest moments in getting started in this is your vision is at a 10 and you don't have the person to do it. And you're just like, I just need somebody, and my vision to plan is so high. And my encouragement to you is play the long game. Identify a leader in your church that you think could plant. It might be in 5 years, but identify somebody. Start, like Chandler's saying, I love that. Cast vision, talk about it, pray about it, and identify a leader, and then start developing somebody. A developed leader in 5 years, I promise you, is going to be worth your time more than finding somebody out there this year. Now, I also think that when you cast a vision, to Chandler's point, when you cast a vision, people come walk in the door anyway. So I think both end up happening, but I would definitely say work on the internal, because I think that is the future of planting for sure.
You guys both talked about identifying leaders. What are some key things that you're looking for, like especially in the church planting residency, like key traits, key qualities that you say, hey, this person could plant a church. We want to invite them into that conversation. What are some of those things that you guys look for in church planting residents?
Yeah, that's a great question. To make it really simple, we look for calling. I know that that feels like, oh, what does that really mean? But I do think that we pray a lot into that, and I believe that calling can overcome a lot. Something else that's really important to us is our culture. So we actually have a team covenant on our team that's 11 words that we agree to, that we're going to be radically transparent, patient, gracious. And so we're looking for that. We're like, do these people really fit our culture? And can we develop them in these other ways? And so that could be somebody that's like, oh, they have a lot of business skills. They're able to start something, and we can develop some of these like ministry skills, or vice versa. You have a lot of ministry experience and we can develop these other skills. But if you're called and the Lord wants you to plant a church, the church is going to get planted and he's going to equip. And so we really believe that the Lord does equip those that he calls. And because our residency for church planting can range from 1 to 3 years, depending on experience, we can really tailor that to the person. And so there's definitely been people where we're like, we just don't see that the call is there or that the character is there. But if we see character and call, we can develop a lot of the other things. And so we've seen that on both sides. And so I think that's the main thing that we look for.
What do you, Matt?
Yeah, very similar. But so here the framework, and I'll try to do it really simple. And I believe Chandler and I both are going to potentially share some resources that we have with the Stadia team. So I'm going to zip through something that we do have a document for, but character, competency, calling, those are the 3 big buckets. We have 3 sections under each of those. So spiritual maturity, self-awareness, and teachability for character, leadership, communication, and integrity for competency. And then we have vision, alignment, and community are the 3 elements of calling, which some of those are probably intuitive. Some, you could unpack a little bit more, but really what we're always trying to identify, the ultimately development is about identifying where someone's at, figuring out where they need to be, and then what's it going to take to close the gap. So we're always trying to identify, hey, we have a profile for a planter that we feel like is pretty clear. And now I would even say specifically, we have a profile for a planter that fits our philosophy and strategy and culture. So we don't feel like we're planting every type of planter. There's a lot of great plants that wouldn't fit with us because of us, not because of them. But these things are kind of what it looks like to do that with us. And so in all those things, we're all trying to figure out the gap. Is the gap character, calling, competency, and how do we work on those things, and how much time is it going to take? I definitely would say the biggest things that I would say tend to be reasons that I would consider people not ready, for planting, mostly come down to self-awareness, teachability, and vision. Those are the 3 things that I think are the biggest things that I hit. Self-awareness, they don't know themselves well enough to know how they're going to lead effectively as a pastor. Teachability, they are not able to learn from others and engage in the process of learning well. We talk about balance in the collaborative. We want you to be able to learn from a lot of different people coming from a lot of different perspectives. And I think sometimes there are people that want to plant out of a desire to be in charge or to have power. Those people don't fit because they can't learn, right? So, and then vision, which I think is similar to what Chandler was saying. There's got to be some clarity on what it is that you feel like God's calling you to, and you've got to kind of have a picture of where God's taking you, and that's got to make some sense with the experiences and gifting and story that he's been writing in your life. So, but those 3 big areas, character, competency, calling, those are the big things that we're looking for.
That's awesome. Let me also say, if you are thinking about church planting and trying to discern that, one of the resources that Stadia has as part of our discovery process is that first segment is discerning, am I called? You've got a whole process there that you could go through, self-reflection, assess to see, am I called? And then the next section is, am I ready? And then you get through those 2. You might say, hey, I might need to be in a residency somewhere because I've got the calling and readiness, and I've got to be able to work on competencies and develop and grow so that I could plant a church. So yeah, so you could find that at stadia.org/discovery if you're interested as well. Hey, for both of you, tell me what your residency contains. What are the elements of it? How much of it is one-on-one? How much of it's coaching? What's curriculum look like? What's practical ministry look like? Uh, tell me what the residency contains for like the church planting residency.
Yeah, so our church planting residency is pretty in-depth, and it's also very much tailored to the individual. So similar to what Matt was talking about, trying to close that gap, that can look really different for different people. So for some, we have, books for them to read. They will have one-on-one meetings with our lead pastor. For some of them, like one of our guys currently, he is in a 3-year residency because he hasn't had as much ministry experience, but he has been doing a lot of volunteer work. And so he is actually spending his first year just in different ministries on our team, so he can learn all of the different ones. They also have something that they own. So they own our setup and tear down team. So they understand when they plant a church in a high school or a middle school or an elementary school, this is what it looks like. This is how you do that. This is how you build a volunteer team. They'll step into different ministries and lead that for the season that they're on our team. And so it's very intentional. It's very much crafted towards them. We have a whole plan of how we want to get there, but they will create a learning document, learning contract with our lead pastor that's this is how we're going to develop you, and this is what we expect this to look like, what you're responsible for this month, what we're responsible for this month, what your expectations are, what our expectations are, so that it's just really clear. So if anybody is looking to do that specifically for church planting, I have those resources that I can share, kind of timelines that we work off of, a job description that we use. It is very much a job, and we see our residency to be very holistic. So we help with funding, we send you out with a core team, we give you people and resources. So one of the things I'm doing this year as operations is writing down everything that I've researched. So all different insurance, all different banks, all different accounting services, all these things that church planters don't normally think about when they start a church, but they need to know how to do. And we're just giving of those resources. We're here's what we've learned, take it, do what you need to do with it to make it yours. But we just want it to be super holistic. So it's a little bit based off of the needs of the individual, but we have a ton of documentation that I'd be happy to share on what it actually looks like to practically run a residency.
That's great.
Yeah, the simplest version of it is any developmental environment that we create has content, experiences, and coaching. Those are kind of 3 elements that we're always trying to make sure that are in place. So what do they need to learn? What do they need to try? What do they need to process with somebody? So we're definitely always building that into everything. We do a 9-month church planting specific residency cohort. So now the reason for that is mostly because we have created other environments, other developmental cohorts, or other elements of kind of our development for people that need more time but are clearly trending towards planting. So my similarly, if we feel like someone's needs 3 years or 2 years or whatever, we have some other environments we try to put them in to move them in that direction. But the church planting specific part is 9 months. And I mean, again, this is probably overstating it a little bit. The content element of a church planting residency is probably the easiest part. I mean, it's just there's good books out there. There's good stuff to learn from people that have done it before. When it comes to high capacity leaders, to me, the best thing you can do is put them around other high capacity leaders that are a few steps ahead. So I'm going to set up those conversations. I'm going to give them some reading and things to get on their mind. And then I'm going to get them in a room or on a Zoom with a church planter who's a few years out or a few years ahead. And they're going to talk through different things. So we do vision, values, philosophy of ministry. We do some strategy. We do some really in the weeds, nuts and bolts. We do training on, legal and budgets and all this kind of stuff. So some of the kind of smaller things that you have to get into. I would say if I was going to encourage one element of what we do that I do think is particularly important, it would be starting with philosophy and helping your planters get very clear on kind of who they want to be, what they want their church to accomplish, what their vision is. The tendency for a lot of planters is to have a vision and then do practices that they're comfortable with, because planting is very hard and stressful. And so what can happen is you can get a couple years out and you can have been doing a lot of practices that weren't actually in support of the vision you've been articulating. So really helping them build on that basic kind of like, hey, here's what I want to see God do. Here's my philosophy of ministry. All this kind of stuff allows you to get to strategy and practices, I think, in a more helpful way. And again, I feel like high capacity leaders don't want to be told what to do. They want to be able to talk with other high capacity leaders and discuss and plan and process. And so we try to create a lot of environments for that sort of discussion, especially with other planters and pastors.
Awesome. There's people on the call that are dreaming about starting a residency. There's folks who have residencies, but they're still figuring it out. What would be one or two recommendations that you would give them as they're contemplating, hey, I want to start a residency in my church? Like, what are the things that you would you would want them to take into consideration?
Yeah, I think for us, we would just say, like, do it. Start small, like get out there and start doing it. So I think the best thing to do is start collecting resources. I mean, for the most part, most people plant from a church. And so it's like churches want to help other churches. Like we want to see multiplication in the city of Austin and across the world. Like we see that, we want to see it all over the country, we want to see it all over the world. And so like we want to share resources. So it's no burden to me when I get emails from other people that are like, hey, can I have this? I'm like, absolutely, would love to share job descriptions, would love to share all the different things that we're doing, because I think it's really helpful. So that would be mine. Like start meeting with some churches, ask questions, see what worked really well for them, see what was amiss. When I came on our team, that was what I did. I met with Matt. I met with a bunch of different people who run different things. And I was like, hey, like what worked and what didn't work? Like when you think about when you started, what do you wish you hadn't done? What do you wish you had thought about? And then just learn from other people and be willing to start and be willing to have some bumps and bruises along the road. You might fail every once in a while, and that's okay. Like the Lord will work through it and he multiplies our efforts. And so I would just say, do it. Like there's so many churches that we hear are called to church plant and don't, because they just like get paralyzed. So don't be paralyzed. Just take that step and move forward with it.
That's great. Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything else. We could probably come up with other things, but I think that is it. Commit. Just do it with one person. It doesn't have to be this whole big, crazy, formal, elaborate thing. Invest in somebody. And then the other thing that I would just say is truly in these environments, you're thinking about developing leaders, residencies, whatever it is, time, intention, space to get experience and process is, I promise you, so much more impactful than all of the stuff that comes into our heads, like which books should they read and what content should we do and all these other things. I promise you, it's like, again, like someone's already figured all that stuff out. So the thing, you can find somebody that can give you some of that stuff. What the person that you could invest in, the thing that they need from you the most is just time and investment. So I definitely agree. Just like lean in, get started. One person. We have a lot of the churches we've planted that have started residencies in year 2, 3, 4 of their church existing, just because they were like, I'm just going to get somebody to sign up and fundraise and get experience, and it's awesome. So yeah, I think that's the just lean into the other resources of other people and just kind of get started and learn by doing. It's stressful sometimes, but it's a lot of fun as well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, one more thing to add to that, Sam. One thing that's really big for us is we put money aside for church planting. So even as you're like starting to pray about it, we like actually tithe our tithes towards our church planting fund, because that's a huge part of our vision. And where you put your money, that's partly where your heart is. And so even as a church thinking that way of like, how can we start putting money towards what this will look like? Because there will be money that will go into residency. And so being able to even start that now and get your church bought into the vision of planting churches is a really helpful way to do that. And even thinking right now, it's October, if you do some sort of end of year giving, consider putting that towards church planting and future efforts to get your church even bought into that vision, because I think that's been a huge thing for us, is our church has heard about it from day one, but they've also been funding it from the beginning. And so they really know like their tithes are going to help us plant churches. And that's really important to everybody in our congregation.
What are the biggest challenges you guys are facing right now as you are working through residency, as you're investing in people? What problems are you trying to solve?
Yeah, I think for us, the answer would be very different this time last year. This time last year, it was like, who are we going to plant? How are we going to develop people? What is that going to look like? And now we're in the opposite problem, where we're really needing and praying for other churches to be able to do more residencies, because there's only so much capacity for, we have 5 ministry residents. We'll probably have 4 church planting residents, and we'll bring on more ministry residents next year. And we're a decent sized team, but we're one church. So it's one church. We're sending, church plants out. And so wanting to have other people come alongside us that are also wanting to plant churches. So for us, that's going to look like calling on our previous 3 plants and being like, hey, can y'all take a resident here? We'll give you all the resources that we have, and really encouraging them to step up into that, but wanting more churches to come alongside and plant as well, because there's actually very few that are doing that in our city and in our area.
So what would collaboration between your churches and the other churches look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of that would be sharing of resources. And similar to what Matt said earlier, there are people that it's like, we are gifted to raise you up. And there are people that it's like, you are called to church planting, and we don't feel like the well is the right place for that. And so we do want to be able to partner with other organizations, other churches, to be able to have that collaborative effort. And I've done that multiple times, and people have been like, wow, you're pointing me to something that's like closer to me, that's better for me. Like, I'm shocked. And it's like, of course, we want to see the kingdom come. And so there's a lot of different ways that I think that we can partner, but that right now is like, hey, we have this person, we think they're called to plant, we just don't have the capacity to bring on another church planting resident right now. Would you be willing to do that?
What you, Matt?
First of all, I'm working with a planter who's planting in Austin, so we can talk about
Love that.
you guys getting to know him. So my honest answer to this is probably one that may or may not be helpful to everybody, so I'm sorry if it's not. But I honestly, it's trying to create more people that can coach and develop like train planters. So I don't have the mental, emotional leadership capacity to coach and train 15 people. So and so I'm trying to add some people to that and bring people in. And so that's definitely been a bit of a challenge. I mean, beyond that, I mean, the challenge is always, I just, again, I think we're just trying to figure out how to fuel and feed the pipeline. And so I think one of the things we're trying to figure out how to do now is be better at creatively trying to figure out how to help our church plants be able to add younger leaders. So kind of similar to what Chandler's talking about. How do we help our 70 churches, and really the 40 or so of them that are not at a stage where they have the capacity to do this on their own? How can we do anything to help them have a residency of their own? Can we take on some of the burden of resourcing or back end to help them bring people onto their team, just to try to get more people in the pipeline? So that's one. And then, I mean, the last one I'll say, and this is what we all, hope for, but multiplication creates problems. So, I have a couple of friends that like started businesses, and I joke with them that I was like, did you ever think about the fact that being successful starting a business doesn't mean your life gets easier? It actually gets more complicated. So it's like, as all this stuff grows and God works, it just gets complicated. But it gets complicated trying to develop leaders that God is investing in. So it's like complicated and a challenge and an obstacle and, a blast. So mixed bag.
Love it. Love it. Okay, I'm going to invite Ashley to come back in to ask any questions that you guys have asked. And so, Ashley, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for all of that you shared so far. It's been really, really good. I do have a few questions, and then if anyone in the audience has any, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll make sure we get to them. So, and Sam, you're included in this panel of questions as well. Sam's got a lot of experience with developing leaders too. So you guys seem like you're killing it. I would love to hear about a time it did not go well. Like, tell me about a time, that something maybe didn't go well and what you learned from that and how you've shifted since then. Whoever wants to.
Yeah, I immediately have many thoughts about the mistakes. One in particular that comes to mind was a few years ago with doing an assessment of a potential planter, and I felt like there were some yellow flags that were kind of popping up. They were like, "Oh man, that makes me a little nervous. I'm not sure about that." But I was definitely in a particular place where I was like really wanting there to be more people in the residency. And so I kind of let myself talk. I talked myself into it. And I, instead of investigating some of the yellow flags, I kind of just like, I explained to myself why they probably weren't that big of a deal. And the person joined the residency. And then about 2 months in, I had to ask them to leave because the yellow flags turned out to be red flags.
Mhm.
And that was a really hard conversation because essentially I had to tell this person, I was like, this is my fault that it's here. I should have articulated and uncovered these things back here, and I didn't, and I'm sorry. But it was a moment of like something I know, but just a reminder, especially with something just this role of being a planter, lead pastor. I mean, there's so much spiritual weight, there's so much leadership weight. I just don't talk myself into anything. That's like just if I feel myself trying to talk myself into it, that's just never a good idea. And in some way, yeah, it's a combination of a lot of things. But like, I just think like we always say that there's never been a planter in the history of the world that planted too late, and there are definitely some that planted too early. So there is no reason to talk yourself into something. Be a developer. A people developer tries to figure out what does this person need to be ready, rather than trying to fit them into the timeline or the thing that would be more convenient for me. And that was a moment where I didn't do that, and so that definitely sticks out to me as a failure.
Yeah, I feel like I have quite a few very similar type things on both sides of like not being as open to the amount of development a person needed, and on the other side, but we had a similar situation last fall. So when we were in that position of like, oh, who's the Lord calling? Like, who could be a church planter? We know that this is what we're called to. And we did a similar thing. But then I think also in just like small ways, I mentioned it earlier, but we kind of failed on the amount of effort we put into external recruiting. So like Matt said, the people who are ready, the people who want to plant, they've been planted or they know who to go to like in their area. And so we just didn't find a lot of success, and we put a lot of resources and time into like trying to find people. And all 5 of the people that we currently have in the process were so random. Like it was like so clearly that the Lord was just like, yep, this one, like I'm bringing these people to you. And so I think in church planting, there can be a temptation to not wait on the Lord and not trust the Lord with his timing and his pace. So that's what I would say.
It's good.
Our church is really small. Like we just recently developed a residency program, but early on it was people spending time with me. I think the challenge was not getting the input from the other team members because they were spending so much time with me. I was blinded to some stuff in people's lives that others were seeing, and I was not getting that input. So I think for us realizing over the course of time, the input and the value of this is not just me and a person, it is the whole team together investing into this person, and the value of multiple voices speaking to help develop and grow a person is huge. So
Yeah.
Real quick, one other thing. This is more like infrastructural, but maybe it would be helpful. One of the things I think we realized was a big weakness we had for many years is just the kind of lack of intentional coaching and development for spouses of planters. And so over the last 3 years, we've tried to invest a lot more in that. We had some things, but it was not nearly as intentional and thoughtful. And so then what really the main obstacle we faced later was as we were just continuing to care for and coach and help the planters we'd sent out. There were just things we didn't have, like the relational capital with their spouse. We didn't have kind of some of these things that would have helped us, I think, coach those pastors through different things. So it doesn't have to be a ton, but I think clear, intentional coaching and development for spouses, I think, has been really important and something we did really poorly early on.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I do have a question from the audience. I'm going to try to summarize this. So I think there is an agreement that like being able to develop and raise leaders up within is super fruitful and effective long term. But what do you do? And maybe that's not their calling right now. Like, how do you think about raising up leaders from within? How do you think about assessing calling for those who aren't really even thinking about that yet? Maybe they're not looking into vocational ministry. So, what do you say? And if you don't feel like you have to all answer this question, that's totally fine. But whoever feels like they've got a good answer, jump in.
I'll say super quickly, Michael Fletcher, Empowering Leadership, has wrote a book called Empowering Leadership. He talks about shoulder tapping. You guys may have all, there's also like the, I see and you conversations. I just think there's really something really powerful about going to somebody and saying, I think you could do this. You're not telling them they have to do it. You're not making them do it, but you're saying they could do it. You're calling it out in them. So I think having that rhythm, telling your people to think that way with volunteers and staff and all that kind of stuff. I'll also just quickly say, if you're trying to be on the journey to planting in general, but you don't have someone in the near term, one phrase we've sometimes used with some of our churches is partner on the path to parenting. So find plants. They might be in residence in another church, but just to champion and partner with and encourage and bring to your church and pray for, so that you can kind of cultivate that vision on the path to ultimately parenting a church. So
I agree with Matt. I think sometimes you are planting seeds for them for the Holy Spirit to start working in their hearts, and they might not be ready now. It might be a year from now, 2 years from now, but as the Spirit gives you discernment and gives you that you could have the I see in you conversations, you're setting them up to start considering that for maybe later. So
yeah, I would also say it's encouraging leadership in the church and ways to serve the church that are like small, but it's like start discipling people, like encourage that person that you see some of that leadership in to do more of that. We actually have our community group leaders are called community group shepherds because we see them as shepherding the flock alongside our like pastoral and leadership team. And so that's an easy way for us to be like, hey, start here, like start shepherding this group so that you can start building some of those skills and just see where the Lord leads, because maybe calling will come from that. And oftentimes we see that our community groups can actually become churches, and that those are like ways that we like actually plant a core team from a community group. And so I think there are even steps in that of just like calling people into leadership. So like what Matt said, but I think there's even really small ways to be like, hey, and also serve the church with those giftings in the interim, even if the Lord never calls you to this. Like, this is a beautiful way for you to like participate in kingdom work in our church.
Yeah. There's a lot changing in our culture, and I'm sure things are going to look differently. Like, what are you noticing about the church landscape that's changing right now, or maybe things you're sensing or seeing changing in a few years? Like, how is your residency program going to be adapting to changes you're currently seeing, just future trends? And are you thinking about that? And what could you say to our group about what to be on the lookout for or things you're noticing?
Launch large doesn't work very well for the most part anymore. So that can't be an expectation. Launch teams is still crucially important. Trying to launch with momentum still crucially important. We used to literally coach guys like let's crush the first 3 growth barriers on launch weekend like that, and that's just not the way it works anymore. So we've trying to add into the launch timeline, and try to give teams more time to like build relationships in their city on the pathway to launch, and then also just try to set the expectation it's going to take a little bit longer to get through some of those early growth barriers. That'd be one. This might be an unpopular one, so this might be the last thing I say before I get booted from the webinar. But I am dealing with a lot more leaders who I think have emotional language but not emotional maturity, and I think that's been very hard from a coaching standpoint because everybody knows how to use emotional language now. Again, 8, 6, 7 years ago, I would coach church planners. I'd be like, "Did you know you have emotions? Like, I'm about to unveil this for you." Everybody knows about their emotions now, but they don't know. They don't actually have emotional maturity, and they definitely don't know how to talk about their emotions in a way that I think is kind of like the way like or it is harder to have those sorts of conversations. So there's a lot more coaching on emotional maturity, but in muddier water. I think that's like a complicated thing with leaders I'm trying to invest in. Um, those would be 2 big ones. I definitely there's more, but those are 2 maybe that immediately popped to my mind.
Good.
My gut is that seminary is becoming more and more expensive, and there's so many folks who are graduating from seminaries that are realizing after they went through the program that they shouldn't have gone through the program. And so I think residency programs before seminary, or even taking into consideration, do we recommend seminary before just seminary students, right? So I think like giving them a feel, a taste, and then saying, hey, if you have a leading toward this, consider training, consider more, versus only looking at folks who have figured that out. I think I think the residency programs are vital for that.
There's also ways I think some seminaries are starting to work with residency programs to actually make it where you can get certain degrees like in the context of a residency. So
Yep.
remote learning and kind of having some things there that kind of allow there to be some experience gained and exploration while you're trying to do some sort of theological education. But
Yep. 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 And I agree with Matt. Like teams are huge right now. Like I think we solo folks are burning out and they're taking too much on. So getting a good team around you, making sure that team is healthy, investing into the team is vital.
Yeah, that's good. I think the only other thing I would add to that is we've seen that like the typical church doesn't always work in every single area. And so a big part of our residency is actually praying through like vision and mission for your church and where it's going to be located and what are the needs of like that community that you're really trying to reach, and figuring out how to like really intentionally reach that population. So we actually just sent out a bilingual church that's doing everything bilingual because that's the population of Austin that he's in. And it's been super successful and really sweet. We've seen other with churches that we partner with do bivocational. So we're just seeing a lot of different models that seem to be working in different areas in different ways. And so we're trying to be open to what those things can look like and partner with churches in what supports them the best.
Yeah, that's great. We've got just a couple minutes here. As you guys are sitting here listening to some of the questions and learning and hearing from each other, is there anything that we should have asked you that you're like, this group should know this? This is something they need to hear today. Maybe we didn't ask you or it's on your heart to share.
I think there's always a fear of sending people out, that what's it going to do for your local church? You've got to be able to trust God with that. Like, we sent a group out in the midst of pandemic, and by the time we came back from pandemic, we were a third the size we were, including losing those folks that we sent out. But God is taking care, and God will provide, and there is growth by multiplication. You're not just, Chandler said, just going. You're actually growing because the kingdom is growing, and you're the impact of your church in other parts of the city or the world is huge, and you get to celebrate that. And so I think the fear of losing a leader or groups of people in your community, you've got to be able to trust Jesus with that. So, yeah.
It's good, Sam.
Yeah, I think that you can't undervalue the vision that you paint to your church and to your people. So like very similar to what Sam said, I think that we've had to intentionally cultivate that in our church over time. And we still do. We still remind them like, hey, this is what we celebrate. This is hard. Like every time we send out a church plant, it's hard, but it's beautiful. And it's like, we're going to bless a different part of the city or a different part of the country or a different part of the world by taking the gospel out. And so we've even had to like coach our people on like, in our team, what does it look like to like love people, knowing that they may only be here for 2 years, but that those 2 years we want to like invest really deeply in them, and that they're doing the gospel work. They're doing what the Lord has called them to. And so there might be some growing pains there as you do that the first couple of times. You're like, we don't really know how to send well. But over time, you start to feel like, oh, yes, sending is a blessing. It is a gift. It is something that we can celebrate. So even finding ways to weave that into your gatherings of ways to celebrate what's being sent out is a really good thing over time for the health of your church.
Thanks, Chandler. I do have another question from the group that I want to throw out here. What, if any, challenges have you seen with bivocational church planters after going through a residency program?
I would say there's a lot of challenges with bivocational. There's good in it. I have seen it work. We actually have a good friend who's doing that, who is a teacher. And so he is actually like planted a church at his school. And so they meet at the cafeteria. And so there's been a lot of salvation that has happened in that school because he's teaching in it, he's ministering in it, and his church is gathering there. It takes a special kind of person. I'll just say that. Like, not everybody has the ability to really like do that, but he's doing it really well. We've seen someone else who they have a coffee shop that they run during the week, and then they also are a church plant, and they're really intentional. They're meeting a very different population. I would just say it's different. It's going to be smaller probably, but that doesn't mean that the Lord isn't really working in that. And so I've seen a lot of beauty in it. I've also seen the hard parts of it. So I would say that we wouldn't necessarily be like, we recommend it, this is the way to do it, but we are much more open-handed because we have seen the Lord work through it. It is possible to do it really well. It's just hard.
Yeah, bivocational makes sense in one of two, or this is an overstatement. Oh, I'm about to oversimplify it a big way. Bivocation makes sense in two situations. You have a planting strategy and a ministry like vision that does not intend to be self-sustaining. So I'm going to try to target a group of people. It's going to be small. It's going to be a lot more like evangelism, kind of in the weeds. And it doesn't need to be, if it's 15 of the right people that I'm targeting, I'm nailing it. I'm winning. That's because then you can have a job and do that. The other way it works is because here's the principle: you can't do 2 full-time jobs. So the other time it works is if you have an income stream that basically allows you to do a full-time job for no pay. So I've seen it work. Like I know somebody we're going to potentially work with somebody next year who owns a coffee shop that he does not have to do a single thing in anymore, but it makes him money, and so he's going to be a full-time planter who gets paid by a coffee shop. So if you have that set up, or again, if you're kind of comfortable with the long tail of you're not intending to be internally financially sustainable, like self-sustaining, I think that's where people get in trouble is when they try to do bivocational and plant a church of 400 that becomes a church of 400 people. Those things don't mesh. And then my other thing, and this is, I'm sure not anybody in this room is talking about, I've just occasionally had a conversation where bivocational is I'm afraid of fundraising, or I'm afraid of not getting the money that I need. And so this feels like a way to not have to do that. So that I just would be wary of that vision and really encourage people. Bivocational has to flow from the vision of the church. So that'd be my only thought.
Sam, I'm curious your perspective on that.
Oh man, I think Matt and Chandler are going to hate me because I'm going to completely disagree with both of them. We
Waiting
planted
for us to have a
bivocational.
disagreement on this call,
Yeah,
so this is
yeah.
good. Took us
We
59
plant.
minutes.
There you go. We planted, and I was bivocational. I knew how God has wired me and who the church that God was calling me to plant. And so I was not trying to be a 1,000 member church, right? I knew that in my context, this is how God has wired me. Um, I also grew up the son of a bivocational pastor, so that was in my DNA growing up. So I knew what element was, and everyone that we have trained and sent are Bible folks. So we have um, in our 13 years of existence, we have sent out 15 leaders, and they are all thriving in ministry, faithfully serving Jesus in the marketplace and in local churches, right? And so I think sometimes smaller churches are where people are looking to be. And sometimes that God has planted those churches for specific people because they need to know their pastor and they need to care for their pastor. Can that work in a large context? Yes. But I think Bible will work, but it's hard. It takes a lot of time. You've got to be able to figure out your calendar. You've got to be able to invest into leaders. The beauty of our church, I mean, I've said 15 people were sent out. Those were leaders that got raised, and then at eventual time, they reached their pinnacle of how much they could serve in our church, and we had to send them out, right? And so the hard part is I'm constantly losing leaders, but the beauty of it is I'm constantly developing more leaders. And so it's you're investing into a few. And you're seeing them develop and grow, and then you get to send them out. And so, is it for everyone? No. Like, you've got to be able to figure out, hey, do you have a job that you could do both, right? And that if you don't have that, like, I think the capacity question, can you work another full-time job and lead and plant and raise up leaders in your local church? So there's some other serious questions that have to be asked, but can it be done? Absolutely.
Oh
My
man, Sam, I'm disappointed. I feel like we all agreed. I feel like we all
I
agree with
agree.
everything you just said. That I was ready for some hotter take than
I
that,
mean,
but
but I think the question of like,
I wanted you to come through and be like, Bivo is the only way to do this.
no,
Everybody
no,
stop doing this other way.
yeah. I mean, I think the question of like, I think we were Bible out of necessity, and I'm now Bivo or Covo because of calling, right? I
Yeah.
could be at my church full time. I choose not to. It's not because of funds. It's and I don't have time to go into the whole church story, but we went through a lot of challenges planting that I was forced to be Bivo. I wasn't planning on that. But that became the most significant part of our church and our church's story was a part of that being bivocational and leading in that context, right? So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for answering questions and for engaging with us in the chat. Part of the reason we do stuff like this is Stadia wants to have a collective kingdom impact. We want to learn from other people. And so super grateful for Matt and Chandler for your time and for what you guys are doing in your churches and what you're doing in your community. Sam, thank you so much for being here as well. We need more churches that are passionate about church planting and developing leaders. And so Stadia can also come alongside in that. So we do offer things like discovery, where we're helping you discern your calling, competency, readiness, and role. A lot of things that they were talking about, we also help do that. So we can not only send out leaders, we're sending out healthy leaders that will start healthy, thriving churches. So if you want more information about that, please reach out to me or anyone here on the Stadia team. We're going to send an email out that's got resources. I know Chandler, Matt, and Sam both have a lot of resources that we just want to open-handedly provide because we want to see more people in the kingdom of heaven. And so we're also going to send that out to you. Also, if you're like, hey, I'm actually really curious to learn more about Stadia, as well as how do we come along preparing and sending out church leaders, we have vision trips, one coming up in San Jose, California. So I'll be putting that in our follow-up as well. We can't do it without you. So thank you guys so much for even just considering what does it look like for me to develop a leader in my church. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Matt, Sam, and Chandler. And thanks to everybody for being here.